Welcome. My name is Claire Whitner. I am the Director of Curatorial Affairs and the James A. Welu Curator of European Art here at the Worcester Art Museum. As you know, this presentation is part of WAM's virtual Give-a-thon today. If you enjoy my talk and all the work that WAM does, I hope you will make a gift by midnight tonight. Thank you for your support. I'm excited to give you a sneak peek at an exhibition coming this fall called Love Stories from the National Portrait Gallery, London. Love Stories will open on November 13th, 2021, and will run until March 13th, 2022. The exhibition explores the relationship between portraits and love through masterpieces from London's National Portrait Gallery, which is closed until 2023 while they renovate their galleries. You will have the unique opportunity to see highlights from their extraordinary collection right here in Worcester. Through a broad array of paintings, prints, drawings, sculpture, and video, Love Stories asserts that ideas of love and desire have been critical to the development of portraiture since the genre's emergence in the Renaissance. Grouped thematically, the works of art in the exhibition present the love stories of couples from as early as the 16th century to the present day. They shed light on a different aspect of romantic love and the role of portraits within it, from images that capture an artist's obsession with his or her muse to those that record tragic love affairs or celebrate the triumph of love against all odds. One of the paintings I am particularly excited to have on view at the Worcester Art Museum is a double portrait of Henry and Dame Millicent Garrett Fawcett from 1872 by the British painter Ford Madox Brown. It was given to the National Portrait Gallery, London in 1911 and will be shown in the section dedicated to portraying partnership. The painting depicts a married couple, Henry Fawcett and Millicent Garrett Fawcett, who wed on April 23, 1867. Henry Fawcett and Millicent Garrett were both politically active scholars of economics. In 1863, Henry published the Manual of Political Economy, and 3 years later, Millicent released Political Economy for Beginners. In 1872, together they published Essays and Lectures on Social and Political Subjects. Who said economics wasn't the stuff of romance? Henry worked as a professor at Cambridge University and was an elected member of Parliament beginning in 1865. In addition to her writing, Millicent was an active advocate for women's rights and the leader of Britain's National Union for Women's Suffrage Societies. At the age of 71, she witnessed the success of her advocacy when women in Great Britain won limited voting rights. 100 years later, in 2018, a statue of her likeness was installed at Parliament Square in London to acknowledge the critical role she played in gaining women the right to vote. Both Henry and Millicent supported progressive political policies, including the rights of workers, women, and children. Following in the legacy of the early 19th century English philosopher John Stuart Mill, their support of women's rights extended to access to higher education. Together, they were instrumental in founding Newnham College for Women at Cambridge University. Interestingly, though, Henry was initially interested in one of Millicent's older sisters, Elizabeth, who was 11 years her senior, closer in age to Henry. Henry proposed to Elizabeth in 1865, but she turned him down. She was dedicated to the study of medicine at the time and ultimately became the first woman in Great Britain to qualify as a physician and surgeon. She started her own medical practice and married James George Skelton Anderson later in 1871 at age 35. Henry and Millicent met that same year at a party in May. He was impressed by her political knowledge and in particular her dismay regarding the assassination of American President Abraham Lincoln, which had just occurred the previous month on April 15th. But enough backstory. What is wonderful about this portrait is that the extraordinary affection and partnership that their marriage represented is so readily visible. The quotes about their marriage repeat what we can already see. A close acquaintance of the couple asserted that their alliance implied the agreement of independent minds, not the relation of teacher and disciple. and Millicent's biographer described their marriage as being one of perfect intellectual sympathy. The painter of this double portrait, Ford Madox Brown, portrayed here by Dante Rossetti, was particularly skilled at composing an image that reflected not just the intimacy of the Fawcett's marriage, but also their intellectual life. Brown was loosely linked with the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, which included artists like Rossetti and John Everett Millais. And though some of Brown's history paintings show evidence of this association, specifically in their abundant detail, rich palette, and complexity, these elements are not particularly evident here. Instead, he chose a palette for the portrait that was muted, but with great warmth. When he received the commission, Ford Madox Brown suggested the 3/4 length format of the painting, which allowed most of Henry's and Millicent's bodies to be shown. There is an inherent intimacy created by bringing both figures so closely together on one canvas. The impression of their personal connection is conveyed quite differently than, say, in pendant portraits, like these of lifelong companions, artists Charles Shannon and Charles Ricketts. These paintings by Shannon will also be on view in the exhibition. The format of the 3/4 length portrait also allowed Brown to emphasize the unique nature of the Fawcett's marriage. Henry was injured during a hunting trip with his father in 1858 when he was 25 years old. The shooting accident left him blind. In spite of difficulty this posed to his personal aspirations, he persevered and pursued a successful career in academia and politics. While he received support from friends and worked with various secretaries following his accident so he could remain productive, after his marriage to Millicent, she became his so-called eyes and hands. In fact, the two became inseparable. There's a quote from an 1875 issue of Harper's in which the couple are described visiting the House of Commons. A tall, fair-haired young man, evidently blind, is led up to the door by a youthful petite lady. The British Constitution would be quite upset were a woman to invade the floor of the House of Commons. So she has to consign him to a youth who stands waiting to lead the blind member to his place. As she trips lightly up the stairway leading to the ladies' cage near the roof of the house, a whisper passes round. One day, perhaps not far off, she will take her seat beside her husband and remain there. Ford Madox Brown gives visual representation to this physical and intellectual partnership, intertwining the Fawcett's hands such that we see Millicent quite literally as Henry's eyes and hands. In fact, the way in which they are seated, it can be at first a bit difficult to determine whose hands belong to whom. One hand holds a pen, one points to a document. Most poignantly, they together clasp the document bearing both of their signatures, the joint product of their intellectual labor. You may be able to just make out the inscription here, which reads, "Your obedient servants, M.G. Fawcett, Henry Fawcett." When you come to the exhibition, you will have the opportunity to examine all of this for yourself, and you won't have to put up with my screenshots. Much as in their gestures, their expressions convey industriousness, seriousness of purpose, but also affection, the kind one imagines is shared by two people working towards a common purpose. It seems also important to note that Ford Madox Brown chose to position Millicent's head slightly higher than that of Henry's. I would argue that this asserts her role in the relationship as an equal partner. In describing the painting, Brown stated that the portrait, and I quote, might be made of them full of character and pathos. To have placed her lower might have suggested that the secretarial duties she fulfilled were more along the lines of a scribe rather than an intellectual partner. Their age difference could have also suggested a dynamic within their relationship of mentor and protege, though accounts by their friends and contemporaries would have not supported this. A photograph from 1880 shows how petite Millicent was. Though both she and Henry are seated, her head is much lower than his, and the resulting impression is one of servitude rather than a meeting of equals. It seems evident that Ford Madox Brown was sensitive to this visual cue and carefully composed his double portrait to avoid any suggestion of inequality between the Fawcetts. For the Victorian era, the Fawcett's marriage was unusual. In the 19th century, women were active primarily in the domestic sphere and were largely understood as responsible for maintaining the home, raising children, and supporting their husbands. Without the right to vote, women could not fully participate as citizens. The Fawcetts, however, were hardly people to conform to the expectations of their day. Henry did not allow his physical impairment to keep him from an intellectually satisfying and impactful career, and was often cited as an inspiration to others with disabilities. And Millicent did not perceive her gender as prescribing her role in society. In fact, Millicent claimed, "I cannot say I became a suffragist. I always was one from the time I was old enough to think about all the principles of representative government." Henry and Millicent had one child, a daughter called Philippa, who was born in 1868. And like her trailblazing parents, Philippa was pioneering herself. In 1890, she was the first woman to achieve the highest score on the mathematical tripos exams at Cambridge University. Henry unfortunately died quite young in 1884, and thus never learned of his daughter's tremendous achievement. The Fawcett's love story is one of many in this exhibition that spans over 4 centuries. The Worcester Art Museum is the only North American venue of love stories from the National Portrait Gallery, London, so be sure to see it here before it closes and travels off to Australia. Thank you again for joining me. Please consider making a gift to the Worcester Art Museum before midnight tonight. Your support allows the museum to hold programs like Flora in Winter and so much more. Thank you for listening.